Were you there? Are you there?
It is a really personal work, and it's sort of, along with family viewing, is probably the most, autobiographical piece. And it was so liberating to actually go to those church sites and to shoot those scenes and to realize a fantasy. As a young child in the diaspora, I mean, your only contact with your culture is through these church images that are sent out, every year, and to actually, tell the story behind those images, and to situate myself, really quite honestly. I mean, some of the things that my character is saying, about, when he says specifically that I always thought I was from here, but being here has made me realize that I'm from somewhere else. And that's so true. I mean, as an Armenian born in Egypt, so much of what I think is Armenian is actually Middle Eastern, because that's the culture I was raised in, or my parents were raised in, and certainly my wife has been raised in. Arsene was raised in Lebanon, and what we share as what we think is Armenian is actually Middle Eastern traditions. And when you go back to Armenia, you realize it's not a Middle Eastern culture at all. It's actually it's a Caucasian culture, and their habits and their social manners are really different from what you think constitutes Armenian. So that was a shock. When we went to shoot that film in Armenia, one of the reasons I designed it so that I was behind the camera the whole time was that we'd be able to come back and find another actor who could then dub over my questions and dialogue, and then put them in those other scenes. But for technical reasons, I mean, there was so much dialogue that was overlapping, we couldn't do that. And what that meant was I had to play the part. It was such a low budget film that we couldn't think of redubbing the whole thing. And I was put in this situation where I played a character who was, I think, involved in my own worst nightmare of who I might be.
So what do you do exactly?
I'm an Oriental dancer. It's funny.
No, I just the first woman I actually touched was an Oriental dancer. Well, I mean, it was this. My father had taken me for my birthday to this restaurant. It's a Greek restaurant, and there's some of his friends there. And at a certain point, he gave me a $2 bill, and he said, "You're supposed to put this in her waistband." So I waited till the dancer came to the table, and took the bill, and I kind of like opened up her, kind of pulled back her waistband, and she wasn't really wearing anything underneath. I remember it's actually kind of odd, and kind of put the $2 bill in, and kind of lingered there. I don't know. I mean, it just left an impression on me, I guess.
I hate when people touch me when I dance. I find it very intrusive, and I think if they want to give me money, they should come and shower it on my head. It's a compliment.
Showering it on your head?
Sure. That's what you do for a singer or a musician.
I don't necessarily shower money on a singer's head, but I mean, no, I mean, I guess it was just sort of something that happened.
Excuse me, can I make a phone call?
Yeah, it's just on top of the water cooler.
Thanks.
I don't find acting anywhere near as therapeutic as making a film. It was a character that I could almost see myself falling into, should, heaven forbid, something like that ever happen to me.
I positioned myself by the entrance and pointed my camera at the two of you, waiting to see how long it would take you to notice me standing there.
Hiç báncs göstermáttig anlanin aspes.
2 minutes and 54 seconds. I tried to convince myself that it might take that long for someone to notice their loved one waiting a few yards away. Two minutes and 54 seconds.
Next weekend I'm going to Belgium to, they're presenting my imaginary Cinematheque, and it's like I had to choose 100 films, and I mean they're all over the map. I mean there's like certainly, yes, the great Italian masters like Antonioni and Pasolini and Bellocchio and early Bellocchio, and you know that whole Fellini, of course. There's also Bresson. There's certainly a Bergman. There's certainly Buñuel is a huge influence. David Cronenberg is one of my mentors, of course, as a Canadian. I'd say a lot of the American cinema of the 70s.
And I know you're a big fan of Coppola's The Conversation.
Yeah, The Conversation to me is a magnificent work. And it's the other, you know, moment of pure adulation is when I was on the jury in Cannes, and Francis Ford Coppola was the head of the president of the jury, and I actually took him the jacket of my video cassette of The Conversation to sign. And I don't know, all you have to do is remember what that work meant to you. It's like I also had a very close contact over the last year with Michelangelo Antonioni, because I was supposed to be a backup director on his new project, and no matter who that person is, you know, we can't forget the enduring effect that their work has had on us, and how it inspired us to be who we are. And you know, it's important to do things which keep that excitement alive. Truth be told, I mean, Wim hadn't seen the film at that point, you know, and he liked the idea of giving away his prize money to a film which the jury had given an honorable mention to. And I think that, you know, the great myth that was sort of circulating for a long time, and which I certainly, you know, didn't put an end to, was that he had seen the film and was, you know, so moved by it that he gave, you know, the money. I mean, he did see it subsequently, and you know, thank God he liked it. I mean, he didn't ask for the money back, which would have been really embarrassing. It's, I mean, that gesture that Wim did at in 87 in Montreal sort of launched, I mean, it was incredibly, it's had ripple effects even now. I mean, we're still talking about it. I mean, and it was just so unexpected. And I think that, I really do believe that one of the things that one is indebted to do is help introduce new talent. I mean, it's something that I find, you know, in an industry where no one really knows what's going to work or what won't work. I mean, there's so, you know, and people are looking for stars or something to attach to a project that can reassure them that if you have some sort of status as a filmmaker and you're able to use that to support projects that you believe in, or first features, then it's incumbent upon you to do that. And I was lucky to start making my first films before, Sex, Lies, and Video came out, and that was the film, of course, that changed everything and changed the whole independent scene. And to me, like, the incredible heroes of the independent scene are people like Hal Hartley and Jim Jarmusch and certainly Alan Rudolph or Cassavetes before them, and I mean, these people who were able to make their films, by in a system that was sort of hostile to subsidies. Someone like John Jost, who's sort of like one of the forgotten figures of the American independent scene. Yeah. But like how those films were made, and he was a huge inspiration to me. Making feature films for like under $10,000, and it is. I think I'm in a really privileged situation because I'm able to make films that look and sound the way I would want them to be if they had millions more. But I'm working with a really dedicated crew, and I'm working in a system that is able to cherish and support the films as cultural product. And that's, I have to also say that the films that I've loved have come out of similar situations. I mean, I think Bergman was working in a similar situation with the Swedish Film Institute, and certainly a lot of the films that were coming out of France in the 70s, and there was subsidization. It's very much like opera. I mean, people expect it to be subsidized in Europe. In America, they don't, and it's very much based on what the public wants. But that can be so inhibiting. I mean, it's one of the reasons I really love working in Canada is that it's very difficult to be caught up in this momentum that has happened around, let's say, first features coming out of the States, where there's a whole mythology about what that means, and it has become, in some ways, the trademark of capitalism. You make something from your own ideas, you make it cheaply, and then suddenly it brings back tons of money. Well, that's such an incredible pressure to put on someone at the beginning of their career.
Do you try and deal equally throughout your work with issues? I think I would certainly see Gross Misconduct, which I think is one of your most interesting films, which you made for Canadian TV. I think that deals in a very specific manner with issues related to sort of a national consciousness. Were you aware of that, and with the audience that you were making it for, or do you feel that you deal equally throughout your films?
No, I absolutely felt. I mean, I thought that was a great Canadian Gothic tale. I mean, I thought from. That's why I was so excited about that project, and it's still one of those projects that lingers in my mind, because I always think, should I remake it as a film, or should I? And it is a great story, and it actually did happen, and it really is death by time zone. I mean, about this father, who just dreams that one day his little boy will become a hockey star and that he can watch him on television. And the night that all happens, the country decides not to show the game in his part of the country, and to play another game. And this father just went crazy.
That was almost like black comedy. That scene.
But that was the actual quote. He walked in this police station, held it hostage, demanded that they play the son's game, and took a pistol to the programmer's head and said, "There's something wrong with CBC programming, and something's got to change." My reason for making films has always been emotional, and I never have understood the claim that the work is cold, because it's really about people who are holding back emotion, but what they're holding back is kind of torrential in a lot of situations. Like, I look at speaking parts or family viewing. I mean, the experiences that these people have endured and are trying to cope with are operatic, but they have arrived at a point where they cannot afford to express those feelings.
My name is Peter. I'm 23 years old, and I've lived at home all my life, watching my parents dislike each other. For a while, I thought that was a pretty exciting thing to do, but in the past year or so, it's all begun to get on my nerves. So what I've been doing instead is spending a lot of my time pretending.
So I was confused by that because I really felt there was something that wasn't getting across. And also people just, I mean, the films do use humor and there's an irony which if you don't perceive the films that way, I don't think you're getting the full experience. I mean, I do think my strength is in setting up methods of and formulas for seduction based on structure more so than the image itself. And by a visual stylist, I mean, I look at someone like, and not necessarily people that are even people I would want to emulate, but someone, let's say, people who have worked in commercials and people who understand and have a very precise idea of how they want to use light and are able to paint frames. I can do that, and I know now how to give myself time, but for the most part, I give those decisions to Paul Sarasi. I mean, I'm very involved with composition and movement, but in terms of actual light, that's Paul's domain. And I can't see light on set. I can see it on screen, but even with those funny little glasses, I don't quite understand it. So I trust that to him. But I'm very involved with the notions of camera movement and editing, and how to create a weave which will find a rhythm. And I think by visual stylist, I think I meant how to paint a picture, which is not my strength, I think.
That we're all citizens of a different town now. A place with its own special rules and its own special laws. A town of people living in the sweet hereafter. Where waters gushed, and fruit trees grew, and flowers put forth a fair hue, and everything was strange and new. Everything was strange and new.
From the moment I read that book, you're just aware that this writer has the ability to actually inhabit the voices of people other than himself, to find patterns to their speech and their mannerisms, which it means surrendering yourself completely to somebody else. And I can't do that in my writing. I mean, I think I'm very good with strategies and structures, and I can represent characters to a certain degree, but after that I really want the actor to inhabit them. But here was this great material about a town which I didn't know. I mean, I wasn't raised in a town like that, but Russell made me believe that I could create that town, and I saw that novel as a gift. Michael's contribution has been huge, because in many of the films where you're not quite sure what the emotional life is, Michael's music always tells you that there is emotions that are beneath the surface. And there are times, and I think this is really powerful, where the music gives you more of an emotional feeling than the images do. And that the shift and the movement of the film is to reconcile what you feel should be happening through what the music is telling you with what the images are saying, as opposed to film music which just tries to elaborate what you're already seeing. So, you know, that is something we're both keenly aware of and try to explore with every film. I mean, let's say with Sweet Hereafter, the use of early music, you know, which is not what you'd expect. I mean, you know, it's not, it has very specific associations, but to hear those medieval instruments suddenly paints the whole film as a grim fairy tale, you know.
Mrs. Otto, my name is Mitchell Stevens. The Walkers told me that you might be willing to talk to me. I'm really sorry to come over unannounced like this, but the Walkers said that you'd understand. I know it's an awful time, but it is important that we talk.
There's associations of a crusade, but you have a sense of it being in another time. It gives it a timelessness, when in fact, you know, it's very, very reality-based.
Please.
And one of the fears that we had about the film was that, you know, it wouldn't be sort of like a TV film about an accident and, you know, like this, you know, I mean, because we can get all of that, you know, by watching, you know, one of these incredible, you know, parades of human emotion that you see on a Jerry Springer or Phil Donahue show, where people just like let emotion out. I mean, the fear when you tell people what the story is about is that they're going to see something that they would see on television, but through the music you are able to heighten and give different direction and surprise people and disturb people as well. It's not what you'd expect to hear.
They decided to sacrifice a few lives for the difference. That's what's done, Mrs. Otto. I've seen it happen so many times before.
You know, he's an extraordinary actor and somebody who I think is greatly undervalued. And he's also a wonderful person to work with. He was so generous. I mean, you know, when I announced to the cast that, you know, it was going to be Ian Holm, I mean, there's this sort of moment of stunned silence, because they're all from theater, and what he means to theater actors is very similar to what I felt about meeting Pinter or Antonioni.
And now, it's up to me to ensure moral responsibility in this society.
So you're just the thing we need. Isn't that what you want us to believe, Mr. Stevens? That you know what's best for us?
No. You listen to me, Mrs. Otto. And you listen very carefully. I do know what's best. Believe me. As we're sitting here, talking, the town, or the school board, or the manufacturer of that bus,
are lining up a battery of their own lawyers to negotiate with people as grief-stricken as yourselves. And that makes me very, very mad. That's why I came all the way up here. If everyone had done their job with integrity, your son would be alive and safely in school this morning. I promise that I will pursue and reveal who it was did not do their job. Who is responsible for this tragedy? And then in your name, the Walker's name, in the name of whoever decides to join us, I will sue. I will sue for negligence until they bleed.
Ian, from the moment he came into that unofficial repertory company, was so impressed by the actors and let them know that, and felt that he wasn't worthy, that he wasn't sort of up to their standard, and was quite genuine about that. And he just made himself vulnerable, and so much about, you know, the system, you know, like the star system, is about making these people as, you know, as detached and as invulnerable as possible. So, you know, he's just a very rare example of an actor at the height of his powers, who's accessible. I've always done my own casting, and it's really been through theater. I mean, I just watch a lot of theater, and a lot of them are actors that I've seen in theater, or I've seen in as character parts in other people's films, and you know, and they're people that I have a really strong personal attachment to, you know.
Well, so many places you see, you wouldn't think twice about. They pass right through you, and then for no reason, you can see a house and find yourself wondering what is going on inside of those walls. And sometimes the opportunity comes to find out. And it could be an open door that you're passing at night. It could be a quick peek into someone else's family, or could be an invitation to dinner, though that's rare. You have to have friends. And other times you would find alternatives.
When you respect an actor from what they've done on stage, I think that means something to them, because that's where an actor is actually in most control. I mean, much more than in a film, where it's the director who sort of, you know, orchestrates things. But, you know, on stage, you really see that is the actor's medium. And so when you're taking them from stage, and when you're not even subjecting them to the process of auditioning, I mean, I think that's kind of disastrous, really, is when you start asking actors to audition and come back, and because they should feel from the moment they read a script, and if you've offered a role to them, that they are the people who should play those parts. That's the best way to start off a relationship with an actor, is to say that this role is for you. You don't have to audition for it, it's yours. And I think that allows the actor to feel a tremendous sense of confidence. You know, unfortunately what happens a lot of the time is that an actor, you know, because they have to go through so many different hoops and different executives, you know, approving them, that there's this lingering sense that maybe they shouldn't be playing this role. And that, I think, can find its way into what you see on screen, ultimately.
You've just completed another adaptation, the William Trevor novel, Felicia's Journey.
I, again, fell in love with the book. I think Trevor is a writer that I can learn a lot from. I've met with him, and I think he's a master storyteller. And again, he's one of these writers who, you know, has this superhuman gift of being able to inhabit people other than himself. And I find this story so compelling. You know, it's about, you know, two people who are sort of timeless and yet very much of this time. You know, one, you know, being this monster of a character who's completely influenced by sort of modern technologies and media, and yet doesn't seem to be, seems to be actually a relic of a previous time. And that is fascinating. And then this young woman who comes, you know, to England, who's a relic of a time when people still write letters, and it's just about people finding a consciousness. And I've always been attracted to the thriller as a form as well, and this seems to really allow me to explore something which I don't think I would have been able to come up with myself, and make it my own. When I read Felicia's Journey, I mean, I felt that the suggestion of this was there in the book when there's reference to the picture gallery. And the way he remembers the victims is through this notion of a gallery that he has in his mind. But it's quite awkward in a way. It's not really laid out. And I felt that this was something that I could contribute and enhance in the adaptation.
He comes in here every other night. He has his favorite drink at his favorite table with his favorite dancer. Sometimes he has to wait for her, and sometimes she's waiting for him. She'll protect him. She's his angel.
If you were to show Exotica or Sweet Hereafter or any of the films to a test audience and ask them what they would change, I mean, you'd come back with, you know, a list too heavy to carry. I mean, you know, everyone would like to see the films follow, you know, cohesive narrative, linear pattern. I just can't make them that way. I don't think that way. And the relationship we have to a finished film is very different from something that we think we can change. So I'm really frightened of that process. I mean, I just don't know how I could cope with it. It's this idea of surprise, you know, that of not knowing what the result will be, of trying to find a way to keep the process alive for yourself. That when, you know, sometimes I can read a really linear, well-written script, and I go, yes, this is a movie that I would love to see. But I could not, for the life of me, imagine spending, you know, a year, you know, laying out what's already there. There has to be an element of surprise. I have to feel that I don't quite know how pieces are going to fit, and that manipulating or throwing the whole question of time seems to be it's so seductive that we can drift and actually address the thematic issues through the people's relationship to time. Because film is a medium which first and foremost records time and gives the illusion that it is projecting time. But, you know, as you know, it's an extraordinary book. You know, Tarkovsky's book of sculpting in time.
Yeah.
I mean, that is your material.
Yeah.
You know, and to just, you know, to not question the natural impulse to linear narrative consequence and sequence is, I think, really limiting. And it's just not the way I think. You know, it's like I like to remain excited by the process, and one of those ways of remaining excited is by not knowing, even as I'm writing sometimes, where something will lead. That's why I can't write a treatment.
Good one, right through me. Come a little closer. A little closer. Great.
Ego zaraz, ego zaraz. Ego met mij die nego die jest nie. Ego. Ego na. Nie, ego nie jest.
Van, can you sing Daddy an English song?
I can't do this anymore. That's 3 days.
What are you doing?
He's taping over everything.
It's sinister and yet it's so touching because it's so when someone tries to destroy or enhance their experience by an actual manipulation of the real, of the recording of it, it's really such a frail and vulnerable thing to do because it's not dealing with the real issue.
I had no idea. It's a thing he has. He likes to record.
And erase. He prefers to erase.
It's just a gesture towards, it's like a cry of despair or pain. It's like saying, this is what I'd like to be able to do. I'd like to go back and be able to actually, you know, change the course that events have taken, but we can't. But to think that we can somehow deal with that through a secondary source is a really, it's very much a product of the specific moment in our cultural evolution. And it's something that I find fascinating, sad, and quite funny sometimes, you know, that we can actually think that we have control over our fate by exercising control over the most obvious representation of our fate.
When you write, have you got a defined Atom Egoyan audience, or do you write for...
I just no, but I also have the highest expectation of my audience. I have to, for the type of films I make, you have to. Your point of departure is the belief that your audience is infinitely curious, exploratory, and trustful. That they are able to trust what you're doing, and I really reject. I mean, for instance, I would love films that start off and set the tone of mystery, that sort of say that you have to be prepared to go on a journey. You cannot expect that it's going to follow a formula. I'm attracted to that type of film. And of course, I mean, the criticism I've always received for all the films is that they start off slowly. And, well, what people mean is that they don't necessarily tell you who it is you're supposed to identify with or why. It's just that you have to be able to understand that very often a reviewer or even a jury, having been on a jury myself, what they're extending to you is the result of an immediate impression. And what endures is something that you won't even know until weeks, months, maybe years after. I think that I have to believe that people are going to the films and prepared to be there for the hour and a half that the film experience will take. And if they drift at certain moments, that's fine. And it's something that I find quite pleasurable. I love to drift. There's no better place for me to just let go than in a dark room that's projecting images at 24 frames a second. I mean, my mind it goes into a dreamlike state, and not to take advantage of that seems really. It seems that it's one of the essential powers of cinema is that the images suggest that what is happening is real, and to not resist that, to not sort of question that, seems a great shame. you know, there are people who become fixated on a certain film, the people who become fixated on Exotica, say, you know, and kind of hunt you down. And you don't necessarily want to meet those people because of what they've projected into the work. It's something that you've released in doing the work, and you don't necessarily want to be there in your real life.
So how did you meet him?
He just started talking to me.
And what did he say?
Well, he said he used to be your lover.
Oh, you
I
can
wouldn't
see
think
it.
that you were Canadian.
Hi, I'm not in at the present time. Please leave a message at the sound of the tone. Thank you. I think that this has become so pervasive, you know, that we all have systems where feelings and ideas can be transcribed to pieces of tape and through various types of technologies, and there's something almost casual about it.
Before we start, I'd like to point out those cameras. They'll be videotaping our conversation. After this meeting, I'd like each of you to view the tape sometime over the next week. Now, it's important that you watch it alone, in one of our rooms on the 9th floor. Then, when we meet again, we can talk about your reactions to what you see, and what you think of the way you're behaving. Okay?
Is that system hooked up to a synchronizing generator?
Yes. Now, good. Could someone tell me what's brought you here?
You know, the way in which we surrender our process of organic memory and our sense of how we can selectively block out ideas or retain certain images. I mean, now that has become quite suspicious to us because we give everything to an indiscriminating sort of technology which just records, and we have to then delay those processes. We don't really know what it is we're keeping or throwing away because everything is stored, and that has changed the way we behave, I think.
How old are you?
He's 23.
I asked Peter. Is that right? Are you 23?
Yes.
Does your mother usually answer questions for you?
Sometimes.
A lot of the time?
A graphic or prolonged scene of violence, torture, crime, cruelty, horror, or human degradation.
B.
The depiction of physical abuse or humiliation of human beings for the purposes of sexual gratification or as pleasing to the victim.
C.
A scene where a person who is or is intended to represent a person under the age of 16 appears
1.
Nude or partially nude in a sexually suggestive content or text, or
2.
In a scene of explicit sexual activity.
How old are you, Tyler?
28.
You still live at home?
How did you know?
I called your number yesterday. An older woman answered. Your mother? There's nothing to be embarrassed about. I lived at home till I was 35. It's very common in some parts of the world. Italy, for example.
Are you Italian?
Do I look Italian?
No.
Let's continue. D.
The explicit and gratuitous depiction of urination, defecation, or vomiting.
H.
A scene where an animal has been abused in the making of the film.
Good.
I think that I'm interested in seeing how human beings react under pressure, and I'm interested in people who think they have systems that deal with neuroses, and I'm really fascinated, as you said at the beginning, by this notion of therapy, and people who are. I'm attracted to the idea of creativity, and there are people who can be very creative about things in their own lives, and that might include, finding a sexual practice that can help them release certain things, or it might mean, actually finding a pattern which other people might see as being perverse or deviant, but it allows them to cope with something. And sometimes that pattern may not be the best thing that that person can do, but they're not aware of that. And it's almost like you want to applaud them for the effort, and there's something very human about their desire to come to terms or to find a way of dealing with their pain.
This is where it started.
I know.
How?
The inspector told me.
Did he tell you what happened?
It was a short circuit.
I turned the light on. And I noticed a spark on the floor. It started so small.
You didn't stop it.
Something had to change. So I watched while it did.
Then as a director, as a writer, you want to maybe steer them right. You want to show, and it's not necessarily what is right, it's only what you think is right, you know, and that's, I think, one of the most provocative issues, is that I'm not necessarily suggesting that where the characters end up. Well, I think I am suggesting that's where I think they should end up, but it's not necessarily where they should. And you know, this whole notion of a moral judgment. You know, I mean, when you conclude a film, or when you sort of bend it to go a certain way, you are saying that this deserves to happen. But I'm very self-conscious about that, and I'd like to keep those issues open, and as volatile as possible. At some point, I mean, I really do feel that it's a responsibility which terrifies me, which is I'd like to deal with the Armenian genocide as a theme. I just haven't got a handle on it yet, and you know, it's daunting, and I don't know if I ever will. I mean, I'm someone who enjoys some of these big sort of epics, and yet I've never been able to see myself making one, and I'm still far away from it, and maybe it's just one of those projects that I'll never be able to realize, or I need to find an angle into it, you know. I mean, maybe it's something that has to deal with science fiction, maybe even, I don't know. But I mean, that is a project that I feel is ahead of me. I love what I'm doing now here. I mean, directing this opera and working with Gavin Breyer's music is such a thrill, and it's a huge honor. But I can't help but feel it is sort of a sideline to what is my vocation ultimately.
Because it's not the first opera you've
No,
directed.
it's a third, actually.
Yeah, because you wrote a libretto for...
I wrote a libretto for a chamber piece called Elstrellis, which we premiered just before it came out here. The more I work in other mediums, the more I understand what I'm attracted to in film.
Right.
With cinema, you're given an instrument which can actually reflect a point of view and can situate the viewer in a really dynamic way, which any other art form, including opera, there's something antiquated about the theatrical experience. When it works, and when you have a genuine sense of transformation and transfiguration, it's really spellbinding, and yet those moments are really rare, and it is something that I'm drawn to because that was my initial passion and love. But with the camera, the moment I started playing with the camera, I mean, you are able to reflect someone's way of seeing the world in a really literal manner, and it's become so much the issues it provokes, the idea of why we need to record images, why we need to transmit images, what we expect to get back from images. I mean, those are all so crucial to our society, and it's impossible to feel irrelevant when you're working in the film medium, while all these other professions somehow risk a sense of being outside of what our most crucial and pressing issues are, which is what do we expect to see, or how has our technology changed our sense of what experience is, what constitutes experience. So speaking of technology, did it all work?